Welcome back to Learn English with Podcast. If you're here today, it's because you're ready to push your English to that next level. I'm talking C1, C2, near native fluency. Now, here's the thing. When you're at this level, the difference between sounding good and sounding amazing in English isn't about grammar or vocabulary lists. It's about how you use the language, the rhythm, the choice of words, the subtle expressions, the confidence in your voice. So today, we're going to practice real, everyday conversation flow, the kind of English you use in coffee shops, offices, at dinner tables, even on the street. And we're going to make it sound natural, authentic, and effortless. Let's start with something simple. Imagine you meet an old friend you haven't seen in years. Instead of just saying, "Hello, how are you doing?" you could say, "Hey, long time no see. How have you been keeping?" That's a very natural, slightly British way of saying, "How are you?" but with more warmth. Now, in advanced conversation, detail is your best friend. Don't just say, "I'm fine." Expand a little. "I've been keeping busy. Work's been hectic, but in a good way." This makes your English sound richer and keeps the conversation flowing. Here's another situation. You're talking about a trip you took. Instead of, "It was nice," go deeper. You could say, "Honestly, it was absolutely stunning. The food was next level, and the scenery, it felt like stepping into a postcard." See how vivid that is? You're painting a picture for the listener. Now, advanced learners, you need to get comfortable handling opinions. Let's say someone asks for your thoughts on a topic. Instead of, "I think it's good," try, "Well, my take on it is that it's here to stay. The flexibility is unmatched, and in many cases, productivity actually improves." Phrases like "my take on it" or "it's here to stay" make you sound confident and sophisticated. And don't be afraid to acknowledge another viewpoint. You might say, "I see your point, but I think a hybrid model strikes a good balance. You get the best of both worlds." This is exactly how advanced speakers keep conversations respectful, dynamic, and engaging. Another tip. At this level, variety is key. Swap common words for richer alternatives. Instead of good, use fantastic, remarkable, or outstanding. Instead of bad, use disappointing, unfortunate, or frustrating. Small changes make a big difference in how polished you sound. And remember, tone matters just as much as words. Native speakers use a mix of rising and falling intonation to keep the listener engaged. Practice this by recording yourself, then playing it back to hear where you sound flat and where you sound expressive. Now, one last point before we move on. Advanced English is not about sounding complicated. It's about sounding clear and compelling. The best speakers use simple words in powerful ways. All right, let's dive deeper into networking situations and how to sound naturally confident in advanced English. Now, picture this. You're at a professional event, a conference, maybe even a casual meetup for people in your industry. You meet someone for the first time and you want to make a great impression. A beginner might say, "Hi, my name is Alex. Nice to meet you." And that's fine, but at C1 or C2 level, you can make it warmer, smoother, and more engaging. For example, "Hi, I don't think we've met before. I'm Alex, and you are?" That little phrase, "I don't think we've met before," makes it sound like you're already part of the same group or community. It's friendly and confident. When they introduce themselves, don't just say, "Nice to meet you." Instead, you could add, "It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard a lot about your work." Or if you haven't heard of them before, "Pleasure to meet you. So what brings you here today?" This immediately gets the conversation moving. Now, here's a big one. Follow-up questions. This is where many advanced learners either shine or fall flat. Let's say they tell you, "I'm working on a new app." A weak response would be, "Oh, that's interesting." A strong, engaging response would be, "Really? That sounds exciting. What's the main idea behind it?" Or, "That's cool. What problem does it solve?" Notice how both follow-ups invite them to talk more. And when they give you more information, don't just nod. React naturally, as a native speaker would. You might say, "Oh, that's brilliant. I can see how that would be useful." Or, "That's a clever approach. I haven't heard it put that way before." Now, storytelling. Advanced English conversation often involves sharing experiences in a way that hooks the listener. Here's the structure. Set the scene. Give a little background. Last summer, I took a trip to Italy with a few friends. We decided to explore the smaller towns instead of the big cities. Add detail. Use sensory language. The streets were these narrow cobblestone paths, and the air smelled of fresh bread from tiny bakeries. Build to a moment. This could be funny, surprising, or even slightly dramatic. One morning, we accidentally joined what we thought was a farmer's market. Turns out it was actually a wedding celebration. Deliver the payoff, the punchline, the twist, or the insight. And the best part? We got invited to stay and dance with the guests. It was the highlight of our trip. This way, your English isn't just correct, it's memorable. Improvisation in conversation. This is the secret weapon at C1 and C2. Native speakers often don't know what they're going to say until they start speaking, but they've practiced thinking out loud in a natural way. You can use filler phrases to buy yourself time without sounding awkward. That's a great question. Let me think. I've never considered it from that angle, but I'd say if I had to choose, I'd probably go with these phrases show confidence even when you're thinking on the spot. All right, let's keep building this into a full, natural flowing C1 to C2 conversation masterclass. Let's talk about something many learners avoid: disagreeing politely. At advanced levels, you don't just say, "I disagree." You soften it. You add diplomacy. You respect the other person's view while introducing yours. For example, instead of, "I don't agree," you could say, "I see your point, but I think there's another side to consider." That's interesting. My experience has been a bit different. I get what you mean, though I might look at it from another angle. This approach keeps the conversation flowing instead of shutting it down. Now, steering a conversation when it's going nowhere. Sometimes small talk stalls. Maybe you've been talking about the weather for too long, or the other person isn't giving you much. At C1 to C2, you know how to pivot smoothly. Phrases like, "Speaking of, have you ever?" That reminds me of something I read recently. Before I forget, I wanted to ask you about these little bridges. Move the conversation into more engaging territory without making it obvious you're changing the subject. Ending a conversation gracefully is another skill advanced speakers master. Instead of abruptly saying, "I have to go," you can use phrases like, "It's been great catching up. I'll let you mingle." "I've really enjoyed our chat. Let's continue this another time." "I should let you go, but it was lovely speaking with you." This way, you leave the other person with a positive impression, even if you need to exit quickly. Pro tip: advanced English is not just about vocabulary, it's about tone control. How you say something often matters more than the exact words. For example, if you're telling a funny story, you might lower your voice before delivering the punchline, or raise your eyebrows for emphasis. If you're making a serious point, slow down slightly and keep your tone steady. And here's the key: practice these skills in low-pressure situations. Don't wait for a job interview or a networking event to test your advanced conversation tools. Practice at cafes, in online discussion groups, or even with friends who also want to improve. Make these phrases second nature so that in real situations, you're not thinking about English, you're simply using it. All right, let's take this deeper and really step into how an advanced English speaker adapts to different contexts. Professional context, a networking event. Imagine you meet someone in your industry for the first time.
At C1, C2, you're not just asking, what do you do? You're framing questions that invite detail and connection. Instead of, what's your job? You might say, I'd love to hear more about the kind of work you do. How did you get into your field? What's been the most interesting project you've worked on recently? When they respond, you listen actively, nodding, smiling, repeating key phrases to show engagement. That's fascinating. So you are working across two different markets at the same time? You mentioned scaling the project. What was the biggest challenge there? This not only builds rapport, but also positions you as a good conversationalist, not just a good English speaker. Casual context. Meeting a friend of a friend. Here, the tone is lighter, but you still use advanced phrasing. Instead of, how are you? You could say, so, how's life treating you these days? What's been keeping you busy lately? And you share little personal stories, not just facts. I've been trying to cut down on coffee, but it's a complete disaster so far. I gave up after 2 days. Humor keeps the conversation warm and relatable. Academic context. A seminar discussion. Here, precision and clarity matter more. You want to sound confident, but not arrogant. Useful phrases. If I may add to that point, building on what you just said. That's a valid perspective, though I'd like to challenge it from a different angle. At C1, C2, you avoid slang here, but you still keep it natural, not robotic. Your goal is to contribute meaningfully while respecting the tone of the discussion. Now, conversation stamina, the ability to keep talking without awkward silences. You can build this by following up on answers, never just move on after yes or no, using looping back, revisiting something interesting mentioned earlier, offering personal reflections, adding a short story or thought to keep energy alive. Example, if someone says, I've been traveling a lot for work, you might follow up with, really? Which places have stood out to you the most? That must be exciting, but also tiring, I imagine. I've always wanted to do that. How do you manage to stay productive on the road? All right, let's keep building this C1, C2 conversation practice so it feels immersive, natural, and packed with advanced English strategies. Switching seamlessly between topics. At an advanced level, you don't abruptly change subjects. You transition. For example, instead of jumping from, how's your work going, to, did you see the game last night? You could connect them. Speaking of late nights at the office, that reminds me of how I stayed up way too late watching the match yesterday. This makes your conversation feel smooth and intentional, not choppy. Adding nuance to opinions. At C1 to C2, you rarely just say, I agree or I disagree. You frame your view in a way that shows thoughtfulness. I see where you're coming from, although my experience has been a bit different. Or, I agree with most of what you said, but I think there's another factor worth considering. Or, I'm not entirely convinced, but I'd like to hear more about your perspective. These kinds of responses keep the conversation intellectually stimulating. Balancing personal and general conversation. Advanced speakers can switch between sharing about themselves and discussing broader topics. For example, last month I tried a plant-based diet just as an experiment. It was interesting, and it made me think about how food habits are shifting globally. Have you noticed that? Here, you use your personal story as a springboard to invite the other person in. Active listening with advanced feedback phrases. That's a great point. I hadn't thought of it that way. Or, I can relate to that completely. Something similar happened to me. Or, that's quite a unique perspective. Could you elaborate on that? The goal here is to show genuine engagement, which makes people want to keep talking to you. Handling disagreements politely. Advanced fluency means you can disagree without sounding confrontational. That's interesting. I see it a bit differently, though. Or, I get your point, but my take on it is slightly different. Or, I'm not sure I completely agree, but I understand why you'd think that. This shows emotional intelligence and maturity in communication. Telling richer stories. Instead of only giving facts, advanced speakers weave in details, small but vivid elements that paint a picture. Emotion, how you felt during the event. Reflection, what you learned or realized afterward. For example, when I first moved to London, I thought I'd feel completely lost. The first morning, I walked into a tiny coffee shop, and the smell of freshly baked bread instantly reminded me of home. It made me realize how small details can make a big city feel familiar. Notice how that feels more engaging than simply saying, "When I moved to London, I liked a coffee shop." And here's the thing. The beauty of reaching a C1 or C2 level in English isn't just about vocabulary size or grammar perfection. It's about freedom. The freedom to express any thought, react naturally to any situation, and adapt your style to the person you're speaking with. It's also about connection, because at the end of the day, even the most eloquent phrases mean very little if they don't help you connect with people, to make them feel heard, understood, and inspired to keep talking to you. So here's my challenge for you. Next time you're in a conversation, don't just focus on what you're going to say next. Focus on how you can make the other person feel comfortable, respected, and engaged. That's what makes you not only an advanced English speaker, but also a truly great communicator. If you keep practicing these strategies, from smooth transitions and nuanced opinions to active listening and rich storytelling, you're not just learning English. You're building the skills to talk to anyone, anywhere about anything. All right, that's where we'll wrap up for today's conversation practice session. If you found this useful, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Learn English with Maria, and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our next advanced speaking lesson. And hey, leave a comment down below. Share one advanced phrase or tip from today that you're going to use in your next conversation. Thanks for joining me today, and remember, the more you speak, the more confident and fluent you become. See you in the next episode.